elaborate what went through your mind as the judge delivered the verdict?
I don't know that anything went through my mind. I think it was just a matter of devastation and knowing that the family would be devastated. They've lost a 12-year-old boy, and now they see the man who killed that 12-year-old boy smiling and walking out of the courtroom. And that just added insult to injury.
Does that suggest that you're not going to continue to look for someone else who may have done this crime? You're firmly convinced that Nick Hillary did
I am
this?
100% certain that Nick Hillary committed this crime. There's absolutely nobody else who committed this crime. Nobody had the motive, nobody had the means, nobody had the opportunity. There were hundreds of leads developed. People were eliminated as suspects. There's only one person. It's Nick Hillary.
Will the police consider this an active investigation?
No, it's done. He's the one who did it. Just because he was found not guilty doesn't mean he's innocent. That's the difference. He was just found not guilty. Doesn't mean he's innocent.
How's the family doing?
They're devastated, obviously, extremely upset. And I think they need some time to have a second mourning period because they lost their 12-year-old and now they have no justice for his murder.
Why didn't the prosecution ask Andrew Carranza who he saw him?
Because it would have been unethical to do so. Earl Ward knew that. That was a discussion that took place off the record. It was a little bit underhanded for him to say that in his opening statement. He knew exactly why we did it.
And why would it have been unethical to ask that question?
Because the information that he would have provided would not have been true.
If you're so firmly convinced of Nick's guilt, how do you explain the judge's decision?
I can't get into the judge's mind. I can only say that we presented the evidence. The judge didn't say he was innocent, and I believe that he didn't do this. What he said is based on the circumstantial evidence, the charges I gave myself, I could not find beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what the judge said.
She also said there was no evidence, there was no physical evidence. That's a hard bar to go over, isn't it?
Well, it's a different charge that the judge had to give to himself. He explained the circumstantial evidence charge in his decision this morning. It is a tougher standard with just circumstantial evidence, and obviously it would have been helpful to have the DNA because that is physical evidence.
The defense outside talked about race mattering in this investigation and pointed to 2 phone calls early on, 2 recordings. You want to respond to their?
I'm going to let Mr. Mortati respond to that question.
Race had nothing to do with this investigation, and if any of you actually had an opportunity to meet with some of the investigators involved, you know that. But I can tell you affirmatively that race had nothing to do with this from the get-go. So Mr. Hillary himself didn't even make that a claim in his civil case, and in questioning by his own attorney in the civil case, had said it was fair for the police to question him on the morning of October 26th of 2011 because he was the ex-boyfriend of the mother of this child. Race had nothing to do with this. It never had anything to do with this.
And you heard not one scintilla of evidence that race came into this trial. The one thing that you didn't hear was during her grand jury preparation, Shauna K. Hillary called Mr. Fitzpatrick a name, which on the stand she said she could not remember. But I will tell you that she said in no uncertain terms and called him an effing cracker. That's bringing race into this. It was not brought in by the prosecution. And she didn't use the word effing. She used the full word.
Why is Mr. Fitzpatrick not here?
I don't know, you'd have to ask him.
Mary, in the opening statements, Mr. Fitzpatrick said there were errors at the crime scene. What exactly was that?
Well, there were errors because there were missed theories in that case. They made some assumptions that maybe Garrett fell out of a window during horseplay and came back up and died on his mother's bedroom. I mean, they had a lot of theories about innocent reasons why this child died. Instead of saying this is a 12-year-old child, they just don't die there's gotta be some reason to this. And I think they forgot their police training, which is, you always treat every death as a homicide, and then you work your way back to natural causes. You don't assume somewhere in the middle, and then work your way to homicide. So, one of the biggest mistakes they made is they did not treat it as a homicide initially.
Do you believe that there was errors that errors were made in collecting forensic evidence?
Well, I don't know that errors were made there because the elite team of the BCI came in and started doing the collection of the evidence. So they do a very nice job when they collect evidence, and they were called in very quickly, probably around 8:30, 9 o'clock that evening.
Is this case closed? Are you gonna start looking for another suspect, or how does it work now?
I'm sorry, this is like the fourth time.
I know, I'm sure it is, but
but.
we're a little bit late, sorry.
That's all right. I'm 100% certain that Nick Hillary committed this crime. There's no further investigation. The judge didn't say he's innocent. The judge said he's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge has ruled twice in this case that there was sufficient evidence at grand jury for an indictment. So there will be no further investigation because I'm 100% certain, as are the police, that they got the right man.
What's next for the family, both legally and personally?
Well, I don't know what the family will do. I'm sure they're gonna have a time of mourning because they've watched the murderer of their 12-year-old loved one walk out the door smiling and laughing. As it relates to the civil case, I'll let Mr. Mortati respond to that since he's the civil attorney.
As to Mr. Hillary's civil case against the Village of Potsdam Police Department, that's still going on, and we'll move forward depending on the court schedule and that. As far as I think your question was in part as to the family and maybe their plans, I can't speak for the family on whatever they might do by way of this suit or not.
I know you answered this question already again, but I'm gonna ask it again as well. And
Okay.
was race a factor in this case?
Race was absolutely not a factor. And I'm gonna have Mr. Mortati go on with a further explanation regarding that.
I know you weren't here a few minutes ago when I addressed that issue, and particularly in regards to the civil case that Mr. Hillary brought, he did not make a race-based claim at all in that case, which is the forum in which you would do so. And on top of that, Mr. Hillary, in response to questions from his own attorney, had said it was fair for the police to question him on the morning of October 26, 2011, precisely because he was the ex-boyfriend of the mother of this murdered child.
Speaking of people in town, before this verdict came in, a lot of them said he's going to be found not guilty because this case should never have been brought to trial to begin with against him because there was no physical evidence.
Well, and that's why we have a circumstantial charge in the jury instructions, because sometimes it only is circumstantial evidence. Can you imagine back in the 1800s, there was no such thing as fingerprints and DNA and any of that type of evidence. So circumstantial cases were probably very abundant back then. You don't always have physical evidence at a scene, and that's the CSI effect. Many jurors expect that there's going to be physical evidence when you can walk into my home and not leave any physical evidence in there, even if you were there for an hour. So it's not unusual to find no physical evidence. We did have physical evidence, unfortunately it was suppressed.
Does this verdict have any impact on the civil case?
No, not at all. The claims are really independent of one another. Certainly the efforts that were made in the civil case were a benefit to the prosecution, obviously by virtue of the video that was played. But no, ultimately Mr. Hillary and the verdict today has no direct bearing on the civil case at all.
Do you have any comment following the possible investigation about the Brady violation?
The judge ruled on the Brady violation. What the judge found is that the violation was innocent. It wasn't malicious or wanton. And the judge decided that the only remedy was for the statement of Gregory Brown to come into evidence, and it did come into evidence. He provided no other sanctions. If he thought there was something very malicious going on, he obviously would have imposed further sanctions. The lack of your being able to be in the chambers conferences doesn't provide you with certain information. As it relates to Gregory Brown, he was interviewed by Lieutenant Murray on December 22nd, 2011. And that was for a rape charge and a weapons charge, which he had confessed to. At the end of the confession, Lieutenant Murray asked him if there was any case that he could assist the police on to assist him with maybe a beneficial plea bargain. Gregory Brown said he did not have information. Then later on, Gregory Brown said, hey, did you guys solve that murder? Now, the murder, again, had occurred 2 months prior. Did you guys solve that murder? And Lieutenant Murray shrugged his shoulders and said, no. Do you know who did it? And Gregory Brown said no. So Gregory Brown is not a credible witness. He specifically said he had no knowledge as it relates to the murder, and his subsequent statements were found to be incredible. Even the defense found them incredible.
Can you give us any conversation that you might have had with the victim's family, particularly Tandy, after it was over? What kind of comments she made to you?
Tandy is a very private person, very quiet. I just simply expressed my condolences. And that was about it. And she said, I know you guys tried.
Did anybody else speak up in the family and say something to you?
They were all very appreciative of the efforts of the DA's offices, Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mr. Mortati. They were very appreciative of those efforts. And they are firmly convinced that Nick Hillary is the only killer. They're not asking us to go on some wild goose chase to find somebody that doesn't exist.
Did the defense's decision to go with a bench trial surprise you? And did you have any trouble resetting any strategies that you were going to employ?
No, you never, it's like any kind of game. You don't set your strategies to what the other side is doing. You just set your strategies to what you're doing. It was a surprise to us that they went bench. That was a decision, according to the defense team, entirely up to Mr. Hillary, that they tried to convince him not to go bench, and they couldn't convince him of that. So that's why they went bench, because of his decision.
You saw all the emotion in the courtroom, didn't you?
A fair amount.
Does you, when you ran and said that you were going to bring justice for Garrett, does this make this verdict even more difficult for you?
When I ran, I didn't say I was going to bring justice for Garrett. When I ran, I only made one promise to Tandy, that this case would be a top priority and I would look into it as soon as I took office. You don't make promises that you can't keep. You only make those promises that you can keep. I could keep that promise. If that then led to justice for Garrett, all the better, which I think we try to provide to the family. But I never promised her I'm going to get Nick Hillary. I never promised her I was going to indict Nick Hillary. I had no idea what the evidence was other than the news media. And as I'm sure all of you know, the news media doesn't always get things correct.
What?
I know, that's hard hitting. It's tough, it's hard hitting.
Following on that, do you feel the media has been biased against you?
I think the media, some of the media has been extremely biased against the prosecution. I think there's been a fair amount of media that has provided a balanced coverage, and that's what you would expect. You don't always expect that every story is going to make you look wonderful, but you expect a balanced coverage. And there certainly have been media that have been extremely unfair and biased.
Tom, I was wondering how you felt about the verdict here.
Disappointed, to say the least. I mean, that's an understatement, obviously. Proud of the work that all of the people did, the investigators, the prosecution team, Mary, Mr. Fitzpatrick, these people I consider friends. I think they did a great job, but I was very, very, very disappointed.
That's it. I could go home. I can put my high heels back on. All right.
Come and get your stuff.